World Bank Group. Ms. Shruti Vijayakuma, Transport Specialist, World Bank. Shruti is a transport specialist at the World Bank, based in Washington, D.C. She serves as the task team leader for a combination of a regional cooperation and technical assistance knowledge products in the South Asia region. She has multiple region experience, having previously managed World Bank projects in Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean regions. Prior to joining World Bank, she worked as a management consultant, where she provided strategic support for clients operating in infrastructure and the logistics industry. Shruti holds a Bachelor's of Science in International Relations from London School of Economics and a master's degree in Public Policy from Brown University. So we have the very distinguished the group of presenters. Now, may I first invite Mr. Yuan Jiangsun to give a presentation on AIIB's experience approach to ECD. Yuan Jiang, please.
Does it work? Just want to test that whether okay, yes, there. Okay. Well, thank you very much, Yuebin, and for your introduction. Let me first express my thanks to ADB for inviting AIIB to be here to attend this very important regional cooperation and integration conference. I have to say that I really benefit a lot from hearing all those experience sharing on those regional programs and initiatives. All those regional ECD initiatives are really the areas that AIIB is also committed to finance, and especially those countries are all our key client markets. So we are very interested to hear all those experience sharing. I also heard quite a lot of calls on the ADB on the MDBs to provide some of the solutions to some of the issues that you have mentioned, especially those things that you mentioned about lessons learned, challenges, and opportunities. So I would like today to share with you some of our experience from the MDB perspective on our commitment on those economic corridor development. So for those who are curious about the buildings on this first slide, actually this is our new headquarters buildings of AIIB based in Beijing. And we have recently set up our first overseas offices in Abu Dhabi in UAE. I myself has also been reassigned to work there. So I just want to give you information on that. So today I will slightly touch upon what is AIIB. I mean, for those who are not familiar with our institution, but majorly I will talk about how we are supporting the regional economic cooperation and economic growth through partnership approach. And the last, I will also mention some of our suggestions and recommendations for the next step. First of all, on the AIIB, for those who are not familiar with the AIIB, we are very much share a lot of similarities with other MDBs, but we are more focused on the infrastructure investments. Our bank was established in the year 2016. So compared with ADB, which has more than 50 years history, we're still a young institutions. But now we have already got 106 approved membership. As you can see on the slides that I'm sorry, this little bit. Yes. We we are an organization a bit which are more focused on the four thematic priorities. That includes green infrastructure, connectivity, technology-enabled infrastructure, private capital mobilization. So you can see that as we put connectivity and regional cooperation as one of our thematic priorities. So as a connectivity-focused MDB in Asia, we try to improve infrastructure connectivity and promote regional cooperation through our partnership. Our corporate strategy actually has set a 25 to 30% target for cross-border connectivity approval by the year 2030s. So you can see that this is really one of our priorities. Now let me talk about our partnership. As you know that AIB is very much project-focused MDBs. Let me see this one. So we are very lean in terms of the organizational structure. So our business model is very much based on the partnership, focused on sustainable hard infrastructure. That's what we say. We invest in infrastructure for tomorrow. This is not just a slogan, but really we commit ourselves in terms of project financing on all those sustainable projects. So as MDB, we bring countries together to address Asia's infrastructure funding gaps. We work to unlock new capital, technologies, and ways to address climate change and connect Asia and the world. Now, as a young MDB, partnership actually plays a big role in our operation. So we identify and work closely with those key regional cooperation partners, initiatives, programs. So that includes, of course, the ASEAN, the GMS, the CARIC, and also SASEC, as all those, we have just heard the experience sharing, and also IMTGT, the Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand Growth Triangle, and also Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, East ASEAN Growth Area. We call it BIMP, YIGA, and also Pacific Islands Forums. So through this collaboration partnership, AIB works towards the systematic development of cross-border connectivity projects. We also have two ongoing partnership initiatives, which I would like to elaborate to you. Well, the first is this joint cross-border connectivity study. The first is this Asian 3-year program with the ASEAN Secretariat and MCDF. MCDF stands for the Multilateral Cooperation Center for Development Finance. So we partnership with the ASEAN Secretariat and also MCDF and launched this 3-year joint program to facilitate upstream project cooperation. So the overall objective is to prepare bankable cross-border and infrastructure projects. This could be achieved by providing technical advice and trainings to the ASEAN members. So by doing this, we contribute to AIIB's pipeline developed in ASEAN, and also providing some early access and the visibility into some of the potential investment opportunities, especially during the early stage of the project development. So the key activities of this joint program, including the updating of the ASEAN's rolling priority pipelines, providing early project preparation support, and hosting capacity building activities, and then showcasing events and the workplace. So the dedicated upstream technical systems would aim to support the development of high quality multi-country cross-border connectivity projects followed international financial institution standards aligned with AIIB's thematic priorities. Then the second initiative we are doing now is a joint CBC study aiming at identify niche areas of interventions to explore a business case for a program for a programmatic regional approach that supports the development of cross-border connectivity, which enhance the ECD in Central Asia. This study actually was split into two phases. One is regarding the CBC pipeline development, and that was led by our peer MDB ISDB. I believe that my colleague Kada will also elaborate on that, so I will be very brief on this. The second phase is regarding the upstream technical assistance solution for supporting the bankable projects. So it includes the pre-concept support, capacity enhancement, updating of the cross-border connectivity project list, and also project database. So this joint study, together with our peer MDB ISDB and MCDF, would aim to identify cross-border connectivity projects that contributes to the economic corridor development in targeted connectivity sectors based on findings of a mapping exercise. So the study would leverage and pooling resources and support among our three parties, and then working closely with other development partners with support certainly from our Central Asia governments. And AIIB also is very much a partnership-driven bank. We work very closely with the partners, also development partners, international institutions, and philanthropic foundations to mobilize resources and capacity building for the economic corridor development. So we are very proactively engaged with the following, with those operation partners, including MCDF, as I mentioned. The MCDF is a multilateral financial mechanism designed to promote cross-border connectivity projects. So AIIB actually serves as an implementation partner as well as the administrator to host the MCDF secretariat. We're also the technical partner of the Global Infrastructure Facility, which is a global collaboration platform that integrates efforts to boost private investment in sustainable quality infrastructure projects in developing countries and emerging markets. We have also recently signed an MOU with the China International Development Cooperation Agency, which is CIDCA, to jointly accelerate the attainment of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. So Sitka's grants resources will support both project preparation and financing of AIB projects. AIB has also joined as an anchor partner of those green initiatives, including the GAPP and ETUF. The GAPP stands for the Global Energy Alliance for People and the Planet. This is really a multi-partner platform aiming at accelerating and scaling energy transition in developing countries. The major sector it focused on including distributed renewables, grid-based renewables, and fossil fuel transitions. And also ETUF stands for Energy Transition Accelerator Financing Platform. So this is actually an initiative by IRENA, who has which is the objectives to accelerate the energy transition and decarbonization in IRENA's emerging economies. So we have participated in these two initiatives as anchor partners. So I would also like to introduce to you our recent initiatives on AIIB Plus, which is a digital partnership platform for resource mobilization. Actually, this is a digitally enhanced platform which is aimed to boost AIIB's capacity to mobilize and manage external concessional resources at scale. So it also provides coordinated technical assistance support for connectivity projects that often require upstream efforts. So there are three functions in this AIIB platform. One is to match between the projects and the partners' pipeline with the technical and financial resources that are mostly suited to them. And the second function is to mobilize resources at scale and speed by streamlining project financing cycle. And then we could, by doing this, we can multiply the impact of investments and grants by expanding the range of financing and technical partners on platforms. So this AIIB Plus is driven from a recognized need for a coordinated funding vehicle for upstream work and the financing for CBC projects. The platform falls in line certainly with our approaches and systematic resource mobilization through partnership. So then I will skip this. And then last, I would like just now to mention about some of the suggestions to wrap up. So all these 2 days, we have heard a lot of, presentations, especially we believe that the enhancement of the cross-border connectivity, the economic corridor development really rests on some effective coordination behind before we through those partnership. We heard a lot of people mention about the challenges, the lessons learned, including the institutional structure. So what I'm suggesting that the development partners should facilitate a coordination mechanism to support the pipeline development for economic corridor development, which will focus more on the resource mobilization. So, for example, there can be a dedicated alliance or platform focusing on the each target economic corridor, so that to coordinate donors' activities and provide joint de-risking instruments and capacity enhancement, including soft infrastructure that a lot of people have been mentioning. And then this kind of annual RCI conference can also consider a matchmaking session on concrete projects that can be jointly supported by the MDBs to enhance business development for targeted economic corridors in the region. So for the next step, AIB is very much willing to play an important role in this annual RCI conference in close partnership with ADB moving forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yang Jiang, for your very informative presentation. I'm extremely impressed by your emphasis on this partnership building. I think that's the purpose of this session. And I also like all your concrete suggestions for next step, including establishing, improving MDB coordination mechanism for pipeline building and resource mobilization. We will, after this conference, we will engage in more detailed discussions. Yeah. I suggest that we enter into the Q&A session after we listen to all the presenters. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Kadir Basboga, Senior Regional Integration Economist from ISDB. Yeah, Kadir, please.
Thank you so much for giving me the floor. So, distinguished participants, on behalf of the ISDB, let me start by expressing our thanks to ADB and the government of Georgia for organizing this important conference. We are happy to be part of it. This is the second day of the event, and I think we are now in the fifth session. I think we have the risk of repeating each other to a certain extent, so I will keep my presentation very short, and I will highlight the most important issues that we consider important in terms of the way forward for potential joint projects with our development partners and member countries. In my presentation, I basically have 5 sections. I will start with a kind of brief background discussion about the role of economic corridor development in promoting socio-economic development. If I can use this device, shall I press on the... If somebody can help me. The down? Okay, sorry, I was pressing on the wrong one. Yeah, I will start with a brief discussion on the role of economic corridors in promoting development. Then I will mention ISDB's approach to ECD, and I will continue with some concrete ISDB project examples from different regions. This will lead us to a discussion on the lessons learned. And finally, I will offer some generic ideas of further collaboration with our development partners and member countries. At ISDB, we consider economic corridors as a way to stimulate trade, foster market integration, and provide new opportunities to landlocked countries to integrate into global markets. Of course, we don't limit our interventions to landlocked economies, but we believe that landlocked countries are the primary beneficiaries from our ECD operations. That's why when I present my concrete project examples, you will notice that ISDB heavily focused on landlocked countries in our previous ECD interventions in different sub-regions. Recognizing the fundamental role of ECD in fostering regional integration, we've been supporting various ECD activities in different regions, and I will share with you some concrete examples, as I said, later in my presentation. Our activities, our regional integration activities in ISDB is guided by a policy which we call Regional Cooperation and Integration Policy. This was launched back in 2019, and this policy basically aims to enhance trade among our member countries. We also aim to attract more FDI inflows to our member countries. To fulfill these objectives, we structured our policy around 4 main pillars, which are enhancing cross-border connectivity, improving investment climate, mainstreaming trade and Islamic finance into our regional integration activities, and finally, supporting our member countries to manage regional public goods. ECD approach is one priority under our cross-border connectivity pillar. Maybe here this graph is too small, but when you see the PowerPoint presentation, I think everybody will receive by email, you will notice that we really focus on heavy hardcore infrastructure and soft connectivity measures when we implement any ECD activity in our member countries, which is very much in line with the model that was presented by ADB yesterday. So I can confidently say that we are on the same page regarding the way forward for new ECD operations. For us, economic corridor approach is actually an engine for socio-economic development, which means we are not only expecting economic efficiency benefits, we also have some other complementary objectives, such as facilitating cross-border economic convergence and also improving social inclusiveness along the economic corridors. That's why by promoting industrial and social facilities in conjunction with transport infrastructure, we try to help our member countries to develop rural and urban border areas, increase income level, and generate job opportunities ultimately. This is the ultimate objective, definitely, to make a change in people's life by generating new job opportunities at national level and at regional level. We are going through, I think, a very similar learning curve with other development partners like ADB in terms of switching from transport-centric ECD support to more spatial focused development approach. And we are now putting more emphasis on investment promotion measures, promoting innovative trade products, establishing special economic zones along the economic corridors, and also we want to provide easier access to finance for SMEs in the neighborhood of the economic corridors that we support. On this slide, I have some concrete examples of relevant ongoing ISDB operations. On the top of the list, we have a project in Africa, which is Trans-Saharan Road. In the next slide, I will go into details a bit more, because this is our really most prominent project when it comes to supporting ECD in our member countries. So I want to go into a bit more details in the next slide. But on the list, we see other initiatives where ISDB also played some role. To start with, in collaboration with UN ESCAP and Economic Cooperation Organization, we supported some commercialization studies and board and economic corridor management modality studies along the Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Iran railway corridor. We also financed hard infrastructure on the Turkmenistan side on this corridor. We have a similar initiative with African Development Bank in West Africa. We are supporting some studies on Rosso economic corridor, which is between Mauritania and Senegal. We have another initiative in Africa, a corridor between Chad and Sudan, and this operation also includes consultation with the private sector, because PPP is integral part of this corridor study. At more macro level, as our colleague from the AIIB mentioned, we recently completed a mapping study in Central Asia to understand what kind of added value we can bring to the region. So we explored how we can complement existing regional efforts in the Central Asia region to better align our operations with the needs of the member countries. In terms of soft connectivity, we are working very closely with the UN system, particularly with the UNECE, to support our member countries' accession to international transport and customs conventions like CMR Convention, like TIR Convention, We are promoting our member countries' accession to tier system in Africa. Last year, we organized 2 events to raise awareness among our member countries. And very recently, in Samarkand, in Uzbekistan, we organized an event with UNECE to understand the capacity development needs of our member countries to interconnect their customs systems to electronic tier system. So we really want to play, a large role in supporting e-tier operations, because for us, since we have members from different regions, including Asia, Middle East, Europe, Africa, in South America, we see global conventions as a way to promote trade between our member countries. That's why we are working very closely with UN system to facilitate trade between our member countries. We have another promising project in North Africa, which is Trans-Maghreb Corridor, connecting Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria, and Libya. We are working with a regional partner, which is a regional transport studies institute in Western Mediterranean. We are also partnering with various EU authorities, because EU is also part of this exercise, since we are trying to connect Northern African member countries to other regions, including South Europe. We have other relevant investment and trade facilitation projects. We have one active engagement with Economic Cooperation Organization to support establishment of common gateways among our member countries. We are also working with the government of Uzbekistan and government of Tajikistan to conceptualize a project to establish a cross-border economic zone on their cross-border economic area. In the next slide, we see some brief information about the Trans-Saharan Road. As we see in the map, this project is indeed an inter-sub-regional project. We are trying to connect Northern African member countries with the sub-Saharan African members, specifically connecting Tunisia and Algeria to Nigeria, to the port of Lagos, through Niger. And Mali, Chad are also connected to this economic corridor from Mediterranean Sea to Sub-Saharan Africa. On this corridor, ISCB actually played very major role for decades. We financed a lot of missing portions along the corridor, and then we started some commercialization studies with UNCTAD and with a coordination agency in the region to understand how we can transform this transport corridor into an economic corridor. I think we don't need to go into details here. This information is coming from our action plan. The report is available on our website. It's a joint ISDB UNCTAD report. You will see that all these priorities listed here are very much in line with our discussions yesterday and today. We really want to finance some infrastructure gaps, and we are focusing on road safety measures, ratification of relevant international conventions, establishing legal regulatory environment in the region, and definitely we are working with the customs authorities to facilitate trade between our member countries. And we also include a capacity development program within this action plan, because we know that there are a lot of capacity development needs. There is a coordination entity in this region along this economic corridor, but we definitely need to support them to strengthen their legal basis, to increase their technical capacities. This is something we are actively working on with our regional hub in Africa. Our lessons learned from ongoing and past ISDB interventions are again very much in line with what we discussed yesterday and today. I think I just want to highlight that we see 4 important success factors for any future ECD project. These are political factors, institutional factors, economic factors, and social factors. Political factors, this is very obvious. We really need strong political will from the governments, and this has to be definitely an official commitment. formal commitment from the member countries to initiate any new project. When it comes to institutional framework, we need very strong coordination entities to manage for everything at technical level from A to Z. And we also believe that these coordination bodies need to work very closely with the private sector entities, because it shouldn't be only a kind of public sector consultation. So we need somebody who can also coordinate various activities with different private sector actors in the region that we are targeting. And when we say private sector, I think we are not only targeting pure private sector organizations, we also mean state-owned enterprises, because in some political contexts, they also play a major role, and we really want to make sure that they are fully on board with us when we initiate a new ECD idea among any ISC member country. In terms of economic complementarities, actually, we see industrialization policy as a vital component of ECD policy, because if you don't have economic complementarity, if you don't have any goods to trade with, it doesn't make any sense to focus more on border facilitation, trade facilitation, investment promotion. You need, at minimum level, some economic complementarity to start something. That's why we really believe that some focus on industrial parks, special economic zones, organized industrial zones, this should be also considered within the program package when we design a new ECD project. And finally, cultural issues. I think this is extremely important. Sometimes in our analytical studies, we miss this domain because at the end of the day, we notice that many ECD projects are actually working on some historical roots. I think our esteemed representative from Uzbekistan yesterday, he mentioned the economic corridor from Shymkent to Hujan is not something new. It has been operating since hundreds of years. Probably we have different tools today to support further trade in the region, but we are not starting from scratch. We know that there are already informal trade networks. I think we have a very similar case in Africa. There is a lot of informal trade. And in our analytical studies, most of the time, unfortunately, we miss this social dimension. And even in terms of linguistic, similarities, cultural similarities, these are big drivers to any initiative when we support economic corridor development. So we really want to be cognizant about these social factors when we work on new project ideas. I think I have very limited time. So in my first slide, I can briefly touch on what areas might be, good entry points for new partnerships with our member countries and with our development partners. I think they will probably fall under 5 categories, which are research, capacity development, coordination, advocacy, and resource mobilization. In terms of research, we believe that there is still some room to fill in some research gaps. For example, I remember from yesterday's presentation, there was a big focus on identifying functional economic areas. I think this is something we still need to clarify a bit more, because in our thinking, still, since we say corridor, we still tend to think in a vertical way, in a linear way, connecting one city to another, passing through, transiting another country. Since we are now talking about a more spatial dimension, I think we need to think about a larger area, the hinterland of the economic zone, the hinterland of the corridor, which means we need to consult with different partners, including both public and private sector actors. And here, I think from the ISDB side, we are really happy to support any capacity development initiative. We believe that this is our relative strength. We have dedicated experience sharing programs for our member countries. We have separate program for short-term needs. We have another program which we call reverse linkage for longer-term capacity development needs. So we are we would be happy to provide our support to enhance capacity with any regional organization that can play a role in supporting further ECD efforts. When it comes to coordination and advocacy, we have convening power with some regional partners. We would be definitely happy to connect our member countries and development partners to other entities from different regions. since we have membership from different regions, we have a large network to engage in new partnerships. And finally, in terms of resource mobilization, we sometimes do that through our reverse linkage initiatives, where we match private sector with public sector entities. And in this arrangement, private sector can put some resources into our capacity development interventions. Another avenue for us is also our direct communication to donors from the GCC region. We are working very closely with various bilateral donor agencies in the GCC region, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, and of course other member countries from our membership. So we are definitely willing to bring new ideas to our coordination meetings. They will be more than happy to co-finance some activities, and we have some actually active projects where we mobilize resources from the GCC region on very concessional terms and sometimes on grant basis. I think this is all from my side. Of course, during the panel discussion, we will be happy to provide more clarification for any point that the audience may bring to my attention. Thank you so much for your attention, for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Kadir, for a very detailed and informative presentation. And thank you for sharing ISDB's unique experience. I'm very much impressed by your emphasis on those 5 success factors. And also you mentioned the 5 areas for strengthened partnership or cooperation between MDBs. Let's work together on that, and let's jointly work together to support the ECD. Yeah, thank you. Next, I'd like to call Mr. Jan Duval from UNISCAP.
Thank you. Good morning. So I'm surrounded by bankers, but I'm really not a banker. I really don't have any money to hand out or loan to you. I'm from UNSCAP. So UNSCAP, briefly, for those of you who don't know, right, is a regional branch of the United Nations Secretariat. We provide research, capacity building, and also a platform for intergovernmental cooperation in various areas. And because we are regional, right? We are for Asia and the Pacific. I mean, a big emphasis is regional cooperation and integration. And so, and in fact, the facilitator reminded me 2 weeks ago when he came to Bangkok that ADB was established by ESCAP a long time ago. So now they have all the money. We don't have too much money, but we are trying to collaborate as much as possible to make things happen. Okay, let me try to be brief. If you can see here, I mean, I don't claim to be an expert on economic corridor development. Thank you very much to ADB for the meeting. I think I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot also from the guide, the note, right, that on economic corridor development I found very interesting with this zone 2, zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, with zone 4 being regional development. And so one of the things I picked up from that report, right, is that zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3 would be prerequisite projects, right, in order to move to zone 4 with a regional development. And I think this is a very interesting view. From my view, from standing at ESCAP, and I'm not into, and more as a regional development person, not a transport person. Actually, I would potentially argue that regional development policies, the trade policies, and so on, are actually a prerequisite to make a zone 1 project like a transport corridor successful. If you don't have trade potential, right? If you have trade barriers, then it's very difficult to see how a transport corridor of any kind, okay, will be successful, right? So I think all of this is I'm very happy to see that this new ECD concept, right, which is very much broader, proposed by ADB, bring together a lot of different factors that I think are going to make the transport corridors, economic corridors, much more successful in the future. So my presentation is on trade-related soft infrastructure for sustainable economic corridor development and related ESCAP work, because I'm the Chief of Trade Policy and Facilitation at ESCAP. ESCAP has many, cover all kinds of social and economic issues. We have a transport division, but because I'm from trade, I'm going to focus a little bit more on that. I think many of you are familiar with the ESCAP transport infrastructure agreements. I think most of the countries here are more or less involved in it. The idea of those agreements is really to provide, to develop over time a large intermodal transport system that span all the countries of ESCAP and ADB. In fact, so we have the Intergovernmental Agreement on Asian Highway Network, we have the Intergovernmental Agreement on Trans-Asian Railway Network, and also more recently, an Intergovernmental Agreement on dry ports. So my colleagues from the Transport Division do provide quite a bit of capacity building and technical assistance related to those agreements. And I think it's useful, given the new broader concept of ECD that is being discussed here, to keep in mind this bigger picture. And to develop this bigger picture. Many of those corridors cannot be developed without strengthened regional cooperation between all the countries. One of the study I wanted to point you to is a study we've done on Belt and Road Initiative corridors. And the importance of trade and trade facilitation along Belt and Road Initiative corridors. And we did some analysis, and I want to point you to figure 4 here. And really the finding is that hard infrastructure is really unlikely to boost export, right? Unless the soft infrastructure is already in place. So if you look at figure 4 here, in a low quality infrastructure environment, right? If you do have more efficient border administration, you can see an increase in export, right? Even if you have relatively bad infrastructure, I mean, you need to have some basic ones, right? But if you do have trade facilitation, you can boost your exports. Now, if you move to a high quality infrastructure environment, right, then you can see the jump is much further. But if you move from a low quality infrastructure environment to a high quality infrastructure environment, right? You can see that no matter, if you move from low quality infrastructure environment to a high quality infrastructure environment, but you don't have trade facilitation, you don't have efficient border administration, your exports don't go anywhere, right? And I think from the presentation I saw yesterday, I heard yesterday on the GMS, on some of the other things, I think those, I mean, to some extent, this is reflected in some of the cases we covered over the past 24 hours. So soft infrastructure elements, again, given the broad concept of ECD that is proposed, I think there are really many soft infrastructure elements that you can think of when you develop corridors. I mean, one of the ones that come to mind really is the ease of doing business and investment, right? Policies, that seems to be very important. But then focusing on trade, you can think about trade facilitation, which actually is a bit old-fashioned by now, right? Because if you look at the nice figure with the arrows showing the different economic corridors, you start with the transport corridor, then you go to the trade corridor, which is actually trade facilitation corridor, then you end up with the economic corridor. But still, trade facilitation in terms of simpler, transparent procedures is something that is very essential. Including transit facilitation. And a little bit beyond that, I think trade policy is also very important, right? You need to have the right trade policy in place to make sure your economic corridor work, right? And then, you know, going further to that, sustainable development related policies and regulation is something that needs to be sought of. So, what is ESCAP doing in this area? Again, I mean, one of the, I'm just going to highlight a very few products that we have that may be useful for economic corridor development experts when you put projects together and so on. One product we have is this UN Digital and Sustainable Trade Facilitation Survey that we coordinate at ESCAP, but is really a global effort now with all the UN regional commissions and with UNCTAD. And so what this survey does is it gives you the state of play on the implementation of a large group of trade facilitation measures that goes beyond the WTO trade facilitation agreement into digital trade facilitation, paperless trade, cross-border paperless trade, and also sustainable trade facilitation elements. Trade facilitation measures for agricultural sector, trade facilitation measures for SMEs, trade facilitation measures for women traders, so that's included, and that's that can provide you some data and indicators that can help you shape some of the economic corridor development project in the future. Very briefly, and this is just the very summary of the results, the implementation rates of the trade facilitation in the survey across Asia and the Pacific. So I think most of your countries are there. You can go to the UNTF survey website.org to get all the details. But you can see very wide-ranging performance across countries. And again, that means that probably there is still a lot of work to be done on trade facilitation, and ECD projects should really have a significant component related to trade facilitation and trade digitalization in particular. If you look at the progress across Asia and the Pacific region, the interesting thing is North and Central Asia between 2021 and 2023 is actually the region that actually increased the most, including and the group of countries that made the most progress is actually also the landlocked developing countries, which is very good news because they are the ones that are most in need of this. Obviously, they are not the best performers yet, but they are catching up. So that's good news. And one of those, now, if you look at the result of the survey in terms of different groups of trade facilitation measures that are being implemented, right? What you find is there is small improvement across all groups between 2021 and 2023, but one area where there is a need for a lot of work is cross-border paperless trade. So what is cross-border paperless trade is the electronic exchange of data and documents across countries, right? So it's very directly relevant to cross-border economic corridors. You need to be able to exchange data and documents across the entire length of the corridor in order for the corridor to function, right? And so cross-border paperless trade is an area that is where there's been few progress, simply because in order for electronic data and exchange data and documents to be exchanged across borders, you need agreements between countries. You could just don't do it like this, right? You need intergovernmental agreements, can be bilateral, can be corridor-wide, can be sub-regional, regional, but that's something that you need to do in cooperation with others and cannot be done without this. There is significant room to cut trade costs through cross-border paperless trade and trade digitalization. Actually, this is a joint study we've done with ESCAP, with ESCAP and ADB, right? Together, we are going to have another one coming out later this year. But really, the bottom line is that if you have a comprehensive, holistic approach to trade facilitation and digitalization, not just trying to comply, to the WTO trade facility agreement, but really going into paperless trade and cross-border paperless trade, you can achieve a very significant trade cost reduction. On average, for the region, we find about 13%, given the current state of play in trade facilitation implementation. If you look at landlocked countries, you look at some countries, you can go up to 25, 30% trade cost reduction. So quite significant. So what does ESCAP do besides the research, besides the survey to support this? We actually support as Secretariat a framework agreement on the facilitation of cross-border paperless trade in Asia and the Pacific. So CPTA in short. And this is actually a full-fledged United Nations treaty and intergovernmental agreement. And so the idea of the treaty is really to provide a place where you can design, discuss and design solutions to achieve cross-border paperless trade, because this is something that has been tried in many regions. ASEAN is the most advanced in this area. They have a specific agreement on this called the ASEAN Single Window Agreement, but it takes a lot of effort, a lot of discussions to actually even to manage to agree to exchange one document, which is in the ASEAN. It's a certificate of origin. They are moving to some other things, but it took many years, right? So the framework agreement is expected to accelerate this, taking on board what ASEAN has done, taking on board what other countries or other regions have done to try to accelerate the progress. So this is this is open, I think, to all the countries that are sitting here. I believe this is a current state of play in terms of signature and accessions and ratifications of the treaty. So I think we have about 14 countries who have signed or acceded to the treaty to date. The latest one being the Russian Federation, which just joined last month. Just acceded last month. But a lot of Central Asian countries are actually already part of it, and I hear quite a number of countries are in the final stages of also ratifying the treaty. Besides this intergovernmental space that is being created for cross-border paperless trade. We also provide capacity building and technical assistance. So in a small way, right? We have very limited amount of funds. So I'm very pleased to be with bankers today, because if you can develop cooperation, I think that's really great. We support readiness assessments for cross-border paperless trade, right? Legal readiness assessments, technical readiness assessments. Those have been done in over, I think, 15 countries around the region. And actually, this has been picked up by the World Trade Organizations and some of our partners in different regions altogether. And now the assessments are being conducted in countries like Mexico, based on what was developed. In fact, all of this was developed as part of the negotiation of the cross-border paperless trade treaty. So you may be interested. Okay, so that was the piece on trade facilitation. But again, keeping in mind this ECD concept that is very broad, I think we heard yesterday, right? A lot of people, and even my last speaker, right? The last speaker talking about trade, right? If you don't have trade, I mean, what's the point to build the road, right? So trade agreements are essential. You cannot do cooperation without agreement, without legal basis, which was also mentioned quite a lot yesterday, right? And so one starting point is WTO, right? If you're talking about trade. So again, it's very broad, but I think it's very relevant. Most countries in the region are members of the WTO, not all. But the good news is, over the past 1 or 2 years, even the countries that are a bit behind on this actually are catching up, right? Uzbekistan is very active, I understand, in this area. Timor-Leste is also very active. And Azerbaijan, Bhutan, Turkmenistan, all actually have more or less reactivated their accession process. So this is something that is probably a must for all countries, right? In this case. And okay, beyond that, and this is probably very relevant to cross-border economic corridor development, is regional trade agreements. So in terms of regional trade agreements, you can see here, this is a last map we've put together just before the meeting. There are 347 preferential trade agreements, including a bunch who are under negotiations, that involve at least one Asia-Pacific economy, right? So now I have a moving map, right? I mean, over time, that is quite cool to look at, but I can share it with you later. But definitely, I mean, preferential trade agreements that match, the corridors, right? The corridor design, actually, for example, would be something that makes sense, right? So ESCAP in this area is providing support in terms of trade policy and negotiation of trade agreements. And so one of the key tools I want to highlight in here is TINA. So TINA is a trade intelligence and negotiation advisor. TINA.trade, you can go online and take it and look at it. And this is the idea of this is to provide an artificial intelligence in a way, right? That can support the small negotiation teams in developing countries so that they can better negotiate agreements with their partners. And then another things we are doing also, we're providing quite a few courses on trade agreements negotiation and economic partnership agreement negotiations. And most of them actually are available as self-service, right? So you can go online, you register. If you pass the test, because we do have tests, you actually get a UN certificate for them. Let me stop here because we are a bit out of time. But we are very much looking forward to collaboration with ADB, with the other development partners and all the countries in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang, very much for your presentation, particularly emphasizing the soft aspects of economic corridor development. The ECD guidance note, as well as our discussion yesterday and this morning, all emphasize the need to combine efforts in both the physical infrastructure as well as soft infrastructure. But actually, the UNESCAP's work in the soft infrastructure is very significantly important for ECD development. Also, thank you very much for being modest in saying you have less money than bankers. But to some extent, it's true. And I want to emphasize that what the UNESCAP is doing is equally, if not more important than what bankers are doing. UN system, including UNESCAP, has special strengths in terms of mobilizing governments, mobilizing political support to reach high-level agreement, like Asia Highway Network, Pan-Asia Railway network. Without a UN system, I mean, it's very difficult. And also, UN system, including UN ESCAP, is extremely strong in terms of setting standards. And MDBs, we bankers here are actually here to help our developing member countries to adopt and implement the standards set by you. So thank you again. Last but not least, I have an honor to invite Ms. Shruti Vijayakuma from World Bank. Yeah, Shruti, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank ADB for this invitation and the organization of this conference. I'm a transport specialist at the World Bank, and it's with that perspective that I add to this discussion on economic corridor development. My presentation will focus on what it takes to maximize the development impact of ECD, drawing on the World Bank's international experience. The World Bank operates globally, so we work across all regions. And a recent report mentioned over the last 15 years, we've committed about 37 billion in regional projects. Of that, the bulk is on regional connectivity. And as you can imagine, transport makes up a large portion of that. Today, I would like to share with you, based on our global experience, first to discuss the importance of considering the wider economic benefits of ECD. And then I've picked 3 cases, and I'll present 2 cases from the South Asia region, which is the region I work in, and 1 case from Africa. And then I will also reflect on the opportunities for the middle corridor briefly, and of course, reflect on the role of us development partners in this discussion. So economic corridor development is an important tool for regional integration and for meeting broader development goals. So what's the premise? We've heard a lot over the last 2 days about the theoretical foundation. Corridors are able to stimulate economic activity through agglomeration economies and changes in geography of production. They can also promote industries, create jobs, develop integrated infrastructure, including transport systems. So how do you select the most promising proposals? Given the limited resources and a huge gap between investment needs and financing, the economic fundamentals need to be assessed upfront. There are usually competing routes and investments to consider as well. So the point here is that there are trade-offs, and there are tremendous risks and foregone opportunities if a holistic appraisal methodology is absent. So projects need to be appraised beyond their user benefits. In transport terms, we typically talk about vehicle operating costs, reduction in traffic accidents, in trade volumes. But as corridors impact what happens around them through network effects, agglomeration spillovers, policymakers need to consider the economic and social impacts as well. When we talk about ECD, it's important to ensure the benefits of the corridor extend to the local populations through which the corridor passes, thereby generating wider economic benefits. It's important to assess which nodes would benefit and which areas would lose out. It's important to study both. So why is this important? Countries invest in corridors hoping to create large economic surpluses that can spread throughout the economy and society. But if the corridors do not generate the expected surpluses, they can become wasteful white elephants. Basically, transport infrastructure without much traffic is one example. And if any net benefits are not fairly distributed across the populations, corridors risk becoming inequitable investments. There are trade-offs, of course, between different outcomes, and impacts can be varied. We heard yesterday the economic impacts may be beneficial and environmental impacts may be detrimental. So having clarity on the hierarchy of impacts across these dimensions can help policymakers to manage the trade-offs and support potential losers. The first case I want to share with you is from Bangladesh. It's the Western Economic Corridor and Regional Enhancement Program, or WeCare project. It's a multi-phase programmatic approach with the financing envelope of 1.4 billion. And it has a longer term horizon, so it's from 2020 to 2030. It's a really good example of an integrated and multi-sectoral approach to ECD. The program is transforming a stretch of the national highway in the western region of Bangladesh and building an economic corridor through firstly upgrading the existing 2-lane single carriageway to 4-lane climate resilient highway along the Jayshore-Janeda corridor. It's also upgrading feeder roads and improving 32 markets to boost the local economy. It has a focus on improving road safety, as well as enhancing digital connectivity by installing fiber optic cables along the highway. Overall, it's contributing to the economic recovery of the region and employment generation following the pandemic. Like many ECDs, the WeCare project was anchored in the selection of a trunk corridor. In this case, it was analyzed from a climate resilience and criticality perspective as well. And actually, the selection of the corridor was influenced by freight generation and expected flows as well. So the highway will also serve as a strategic geographical gateway to the region, to Bhutan, Nepal, and India. And the second key takeaway from this case is beyond infrastructure, it's important to determine the appropriate mix of interventions and complementary policies. So in this case, the project is supporting complementary investments in agriculture, in markets, in urban infrastructure, public services, and other spatially targeted incentives. Ultimately, ECD is also about people, and WeCare recognizes the need to maximize the social development and employment opportunities and increase the participation of historically disadvantaged communities. So the project is catalyzing the economy of the West, contributing to the livelihoods of over 20 million people living in the program districts. The second case is also from South Asia. We heard earlier today that South Asia is one of the least economically integrated regions in the world, with comparatively high barriers to trade and investment. So the World Bank is supporting the upgrading of cross-border trade facilitation infrastructure in Eastern South Asia under the Accelerating Transport and Trade Connectivity, or ACCESS program. The investments are worth over $1 billion, and Nepal and Bangladesh were in the first phase, and this was approved last June, and Bhutan is currently under preparation. So similar to the last example, this is a multi-phase approach and a longer-term engagement. And this structure allows complex engagements such as this one through a set of linked operations under one program. In this case, it's a horizontal MPA, which means it's multi-country, where a common approach makes sense. The Access program and this particular MPA also allows the countries to tap into the regional financing window of the World Bank, which gives them additional concessional financing, and it allows the project to scale up very easily under this MPA framework. The overall objective is to increase the efficiency and resilience of trade and transport along selected regional corridors. And there's three main pillars to this program. The first is on digital systems for trade, the second on green and resilient transport and trade infrastructure, and the third on institutional and policy strengthening for transport and trade. To give you a flavor of some of the investments, in Nepal, we are supporting the East-West Highway. You heard about it earlier today from our representative from Nepal. In Bangladesh, we are supporting the upgrade of 3 land ports, including Benapole, which is on the Bangladeshi side of the other side is Petropole, which is, of course, India's busiest land port. So there are, of course, added complexities with cross-border or multi-country ECD, and this is where the harmonization of policies and regulations to enhance trade facilitation is critical, beyond just physical infrastructure. So one way of doing this is to pilot one-stop border posts. These have the potential to enhance cross-border trade and investment, making it easier for traders to conduct business across borders and reducing the cost of trade. Secondly, the implementation of the WTO's TFA's provisions is one of the ways to incorporate best practice trade facilitation instruments in corridor operations. The program is also focused on enhancing port efficiency through digitization. So it's not just about building new infrastructure. We're supporting the development of a digital border management system, promoting simplified and paperless processes, as well as upgrading to contemporary facilities. So the upgrades at Benapole in Bangladesh have the potential to double the trade at the border from the current level of about 500 trucks traveling in the India to Bangladesh direction every day. The third key finding from this program I wanted to highlight is the importance of peer learning and capacity building. These platforms have the potential to promote this agenda by establishing common understanding among countries, enhancing technical cooperation, and addressing some of the sticky issues such as non-tariff barriers. It will also facilitate cooperation beyond the more formal or official channels that take time to see progress. The third case is from Africa. It's the Maputo corridor. It's arguably the most successful economic corridor in Africa. The objective of this ECD was to rehabilitate the existing core infrastructure, to attract investment to the corridor, to make it sustainable through relevant policies and strategies, and to maximize the impact. For context, this ECD benefited from a long history of collaboration between Mozambique and South Africa, going back to the late 1800s, in fact. But on the political level, South Africa was also emerging from the apartheid era and the isolation resulting from sanctions, particularly from its neighbors. So the Maputo corridor provided an opportunity to reach out and establish a new and constructive relationship with its neighbors. Similarly, Mozambique was also coming out of a long conflict and needed to reconstruct its economy. So the alignment of interest combined with the coincidence of time was essential in lifting the profile of this corridor. It was conceived initially as a spatial development initiative to unlock the inherent potential of specific spatial locations. And it was launched in 1996 to connect South Africa's landlocked Gauteng province to the port of Maputo. The infrastructure developments included rehabilitating the primary infrastructure network along the corridor, so the road, rail, border posts, port, and terminal facilities. But investments were broader. They included transmission lines, gas line, railway line upgrade, and so forth. So what has been the impact of this corridor? We see it's vastly improved the corridor performance. Maputo is among the best performing corridors in sub-Saharan Africa. We see continuing investment in infrastructure and services. There is strong multi-sector stakeholder participation. We've seen expansion of cities and centers within the corridor and an increase in tourism and trade flows. To give you one example, citrus exports from South Africa was more than 50% cheaper via the new corridor compared to the domestic route. And then it also provided a platform to address any operational efficiencies that came up. So what can we take away? I think the first point is that multi-stakeholder engagement is critical. And although the set of relevant stakeholders may change or may vary over time, they need to be engaged from the get-go. Second, ensuring alignment of both regional and national strategies right from the beginning is important, but it's also essential to maintain over time. Central buy-in and coordination is also critical. We need government commitment at all levels. And in the Maputo case, political support was very strong. We've heard this almost in all the sessions, but the institutional framework is critical, and developing institutions that are able to operate across geopolitical boundaries has also helped attract private investment in this case. So one of the mechanisms was through the Maputo Corridor Logistics Initiative, MCLI. It was a nonprofit membership organization and had about 170 members from all the three countries, Mozambique, Swaziland, and South Africa. And it successfully created this partnership and interface between the government and the private sector on lobbying on certain issues and addressing operational issues as well. And the Maputo case was able to attract private financing successfully through a number of PPPs. In this case, the economic rationale for the investment was clear. There were no doubts on the critical projects. The traffic volumes and the ability to pay were proven. But of course, alignment of all these factors, it's difficult to replicate such a spatial development initiative. Drawing on all these lessons, I wanted to briefly note, since we are in Georgia, I wanted to say a few words on the middle corridor and what opportunities there may be there. So it's gained a lot of attention recently, and I think what we have learned is it's important to understand the potential to support trade and development in the countries it crosses. So in particular, to understand the nodes that are going to benefit along the MC, the capacity constraints that are to be addressed through infrastructure investments, the policies that could help reduce delays along the corridor, and the potential to develop any new value chains. I won't say too much more because the World Bank is currently preparing a study on the middle corridor to better understand its potential to support trade and development in the countries that it crosses. And finally, to my last slide on the role of development partners, we have a critical role to play in promoting this ECD agenda. The first area I wanted to highlight is to continue collaborating to co-finance well-designed ECD projects. So we are already collaborating pretty well, but there's always room for improvement. The AIIB, for example, is co-financing the We Care trunk corridor that I explained earlier. Access is financing select priorities from the SASEC operational plan. And then the Nepal East-West Highway sections are jointly being supported by both ADB and the World Bank. So it's critical to continue these partnerships, particularly in mobilizing financing that's needed. The second point is, as development partners such as ADB and the World Bank, we work cross-sectorally. So we bring that advantage of having sectoral expertise beyond, the traditional transport sectors. So it's really important to ensure a coordinated and complementary approach. I very much like the proposal by AIIB on developing kind of a shared platform to share information on pipeline and current projects and lessons learned. I think conferences like this one provide a great opportunity to reflect on what we have done so far. I think clearly there's improvement. There is room for improvement because generally we see in many countries that we're still talking about investments on a modal basis. So investments in ports or road or rail, they may include a reference to improving corridor performance, but we need to really talk about it from the get-go to achieve the objectives that we've outlined. The third area is on building the evidence base. So continue knowledge efforts, particularly I think on quantifying the benefits of ECD and communicating and disseminating the impacts. I think the World Bank has the experience from many regions that we can add to this dialogue as well. And then my final point is on the need to build trust and enhance the political will for this agenda. So often the sticky part is the political economy issues, right? We can't really do much unless those are resolved. So it's important to identify corridor champions in the countries we work in. And I mentioned earlier the point on peer-to-peer learning platforms, and I think that's a great way to ensure cooperation on a technical level to help reduce the trust deficit that we see in many of the countries we work in. So thank you very much. I hope to maybe reflect on the guidance note during the discussion, but thank you for listening.
Thank you, Shruti, for sharing World Bank's experience. The project examples you cited in Bangladesh, Eastern South Asia, and Africa use a multi-sector, multi-country, multi-phase, and a multi-stakeholder approach for economic for ECD. I think these are exactly the good case project we are looking for. And also, you rightly emphasize the need for holistic approach for reaching wider economic benefits from ECD. And also, I think I can speak on behalf of our colleagues from MDBs that we fully agree with you in terms of the areas of and also opportunities for strengthening the cooperation between multilateral institutions. Now it's 12:40 or 12:45. I don't want to stand between you and lunch, but I do want to still use about 10 minutes. Probably we can allow for 3 or 4 questions from the floor. Any questions or comments? Yeah, gentlemen, please. From Carrick Institute.
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate the work that you guys has presented. And before asking my question, let me just highlight for the sake of the knowledge for the audience
that Carrick Institute has been engaged with the Islamic Development Bank for the last, I would say, 3 phases in the digital discourse. So really thankful to Islamic Development Bank for that. And then we've been engaged with the research extent to some extent with the UN ESCAPE as well. So Jan, thank you so much for that opportunity. And I'm really looking forward to AIIB and then the World Bank colleagues here, so that if we can join hands and work together with the Carrick Institute initiatives. My question is about the in terms of the projects that you guys has presented, great work. So how we can, if we can relate it to the trade facilitation. So my question is how these corridors across, like for example, Islamic Development Bank presented like all these big sub-Sahara Africans connected with the north of Africa. How these are basically facilitating trade in this specific region. And more specifically, is there any kind of a follow-up assessment approach so that you guys can basically measure or know like what kind of trade facilitation is going on specific to the corridor that you guys are financing? Let me give an example. The Carrick Institute, in collaboration with the Asian Development Bank, for the last 14 years, we've been doing this CPMM project, the Carrick Corridor Performance and Measurement project. And the beauty is that it's like, I think there's a big 6 corridors that it goes across the Carrick countries. But what we do, I think, differently in every year, that is that we go for the ground data collection across the member countries. And we have nominated like 76 BCPs, border crossing points across the member countries. And every year we collect the data. So those kind of follow-up assessment approach basically educate the Carrick member countries where existed the Carrick member countries in terms of trade facilitation indicators. And there are a couple of 5 indicators that we usually collect data for every year. So my question is that, is there any kind of a follow-up assessment work related to the projects that you guys have mentioned in your presentation, so that the member country by the end of the day can take the policy recommendation based on your pre-assessment? Thank you so much.
Anyone, probably Shruti, you'd like to take up this question from a Carrick Institute?
Thank you very much for this very good question. I think often data collection is the most challenging part, right, of any project. And you rightly mentioned that it's key to monitoring progress. So for every World Bank project, we actually have key outcome indicators that are reviewed at least biannually, and then we have targets, of course, for the end of the project. And at the completion of every project, we also undertake a implementation completion review report, which reviews basically how successful the project was in meeting these indicators. This, of course, gives us lessons on what has worked and perhaps what hasn't worked for the design and preparation of future projects. So it's definitely systematically built in how we design our projects in this area.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Shruti was saying. Actually, the data from a CPMM has been actually used by ADB in designing concrete investment projects, what we call RIPS project, Regional Improvement of Border Services projects in Tajikistan, Kyrgyz, Mongolia, and also between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And now a new project under ABEC is also being prepared. I'd also like to mention that Yang, you have been, I said, Yang, you have been very modest in saying that you have less money than bankers. But actually, UNSCAP develops a standards methodology, which are so important for the software-related work. ADB has been doing this CPMM over many years. Actually, the CPMM was based on the methodology which is a TCD, time cost distance methodology, developed by UNESCAP. This is another good example of a partnership, and also each party has its own strengths. Do we have other hands? Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to refer to the earlier presentation which talked about the importance of having trade agreements. Was it the FTAs? I really think that it matters a lot. However, I have a quick question on, is it possible for sub-regional cooperation to take advantage of FTAs so that it can be a determinant for increasing trade within the regional corridors? And how can we take advantage when sub-regional economic cooperations might not, I'm speaking in the context of the BIMP-IAGA, might not have an FTA as a sub-regional grouping with other potential trade partners?
Probably Yang, you would like to take up this question?
Okay, yes. Thank you. Yes, I mean, the slides with the noodle bowl of agreement was about the preferential trade agreements. I think if you talk about BIMP-IAGA, I think this is actually ASEAN region, right? So I think most of the countries are covered or by the ASEAN trade agreements. And so in the case in a case like this, I think you already have the trade environment, trade environment in place to actually do the infrastructure and build further infrastructure. So I don't think there is a need to do an agreement between BIMP-IAGA countries. That's not it. But in some other corridors, you may end up with having some countries who are part of one agreement, but not another. And in which case, then here, what you may want to do is you may want to consider this and see how you can possibly consider expanding an existing agreement or putting together trade agreements. But I mean, a rule of thumb as well is we don't want to further increase the noodle bowl, right? I mean, there is already 300, I forgot the number, but it's a very large number. So I think what ASEAN has been doing actually with RCEP is actually something that is great, right? I mean, you go, you try to integrate as much as possible all the smaller trade agreements, preferential trade agreements into larger ones. So that would be the trade policy level recommendation I would make. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like also to add to the question raised by our Filipino colleague. And actually, in reality, we have so many FTAs or PTAs existing, what we call the spaghetti effects. From ADB's perspective, negotiating new free trade agreements is important, but probably more important thing is to use the existing FTAs effectively. Actually, in many DMCs, the private sector are not so familiar with what has been achieved, what has been agreed between governments. So in the future, ADB would like to spend more effort on helping our developing member countries to more effectively use the various types of free trade agreements. Yes, yeah, please.
I'm Shakir from Pakistan. For the last 2 days, like we have heard, and so many discussion took place covering so many things like regional connectivity and economic corridor development, etc. We also have seen updated position of the ongoing economic corridors in various parts of the regions like Carrick and